The Pope's eyes began to close, but he forced them open again because he had one more thing to say, the most important thing of all. Marcus, you came here today thinking you were just a simple guard who had failed in his duties, but you are leaving here knowing the truth about who you really are. You are a guardian angel sent by God to show his love to a world that desperately needs it. You are a living example of what it means to serve others with a pure heart. The Pope's voice became a whisper, but every word was clear. For 15 years, you have been my protector, my helper, and my friend. But more than that, you have been my teacher. You have shown me what holiness really looks like. It does not look like perfection or great achievements. It looks like the courage to love imperfectly, completely, and without reservation. As the last light of day faded from the window, Pope Francis spoke his final words to Marcus. Thank you, my dear friend, for showing me that the kingdom of heaven is not found in grand cathedrals or important ceremonies. It is found in the gentle touch of a guard helping an elderly visitor. It is found in the patient smile of a protector comforting a frightened child. It is found in the loving heart of a father who gives everything for his disabled son. The Pope closed his eyes peacefully, and Marcus knew that these words would guide him and strengthen him for the rest of his life. He had come to this room as a guard burdened by guilt and doubt. He was leaving as a man who finally understood his true purpose and worth. In serving Pope Francis, Marcus had discovered not just his calling, but his true identity as a guardian angel whose greatest strength was not his ability to protect from danger, but his capacity to love without limits. As the Pope shared these stories, Marcus began to realize that his 15 years of service had created a web of connections and kindnesses that stretched around the world. People he had barely remembered had been deeply affected by simple acts of human decency and care. This is the legacy you have built, Marcus, Pope Francis said with deep satisfaction. Not just a record of security services performed, but a collection of human hearts that have been touched by love and grace. This is what makes a true guardian. The Pope looked back out at the crowds in the square below. When people ask you about this conversation, about these final hours we have spent together, I want you to tell them something very important. Tell them that a guard's highest honor is not found in the uniform he wears or the protocols he follows. It is found in the love he shows to every person he encounters, especially those who seem least important to the world. As the sun began to set over Vatican City, the golden light streaming through the window made everything in the room look warm and peaceful. Pope Francis seemed to gather his remaining strength for what he knew would be his final words to Marcus. The Holy Father's face, though pale and tired, was filled with a deep peace and joy that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. Marcus, my faithful friend, the Pope said, his voice softer now, but still clear and strong with emotion. You have spent 15 years thinking that you were protecting me, but I want you to understand something very important. The truth is that you have been protecting something much more precious than just one old man. Marcus leaned closer to hear every word. He could feel that this moment was sacred, that these words would stay with him for the rest of his life. You have been protecting the idea that every single person who walks through these doors matters to God, Pope Francis continued. You have been protecting the belief that kindness is more powerful than fear, that love is stronger than hate, that service to others is the same as service to God himself. The Pope reached out and took Marcus's hand in both of his own hands, holding it with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Every time you showed patience to a difficult visitor, you were protecting the idea that everyone deserves respect. Every time you helped someone who was struggling, you were protecting the belief that we are all brothers and sisters in God's family. Every time you treated someone with dignity, regardless of their status or appearance, you were protecting the truth that we are all made in God's image. Marcus felt these words sinking deep into his heart. He had never thought about his work in such grand terms, but now he could see that his small acts of kindness had been part of something much larger and more important. The children who smiled because you made funny faces during boring ceremonies will grow up remembering that even serious places can be filled with joy. The sick people who felt your compassion will heal faster because they know they are loved. The lonely visitors who experienced your warmth will go home knowing that they matter to someone. Pope Francis paused, looking directly into Marcus's eyes with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. This is what I call the ripple effect of love, Marcus. Every act of kindness you have performed has spread out like ripples on a pond, touching lives in ways you will never fully know. The Pope's voice became even more gentle and filled with wonder. Do you know that there is a small church in the Philippines where they pray for you every Sunday? The pastor there met you briefly during one of our visits, and he was so impressed by your humility and kindness that he tells his congregation stories about the Swiss Guard who shows them what it means to be a true Christian. Marcus felt amazed. He barely remembered meeting any pastor in the Philippines, but apparently that brief encounter had created lasting impact. And there is a school in Brazil where they have a picture of you hanging in their classroom. It is the picture of you kneeling beside Father Miguel's grave, placing flowers and saying prayers. The teacher uses that picture to explain to her students what it means to honor the memory of those we love. Tears began flowing down Marcus's face again, as he realized how far his simple acts of love and respect had traveled around the world. Pope Francis squeezed Marcus's hand tighter and spoke with all the strength he had left. When people ask you about this moment, about these final words I am sharing with you, tell them this. A guard's highest honor is not in the uniform he wears or the protocols he follows. It is in the love he shows to every person he encounters, especially those who seem least important to the world. Marcus felt overwhelmed by gratitude and emotion. For years, he had hidden his relationship with David because he was afraid people would see his son as a burden or an embarrassment. But the Pope saw David as a gift, as someone worth celebrating and honoring. When David comes to visit, the Pope said softly, "I want to personally thank him for sharing his father with all of us. I want to tell him how proud he should be of the man who loves him so much that he dedicates his entire life to his care and happiness." Marcus realized that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined possible. The shame and secrecy he had carried for so long were being replaced with honor and celebration. As the hours passed, Marcus noticed that Pope Francis seemed to be getting weaker, but somehow his spirit appeared to be growing stronger. The Holy Father asked Marcus to help him move from the bed to a chair by the window. Together, they looked out at the scene below in St. Peter's Square. Word had somehow spread throughout Rome that the Pope was not feeling well. Thousands of people had gathered in the square below, holding candles and praying quietly. Some were kneeling on the hard stone ground. Others were singing gentle hymns. Children were holding pictures of Pope Francis, and elderly people were clutching rosaries in their weathered hands. "Look at them," Pope Francis said, pointing to the crowds below with a hand that shook slightly but still moved with purpose. "Each one of those people down there carries the same kinds of burdens that you have been carrying, Marcus. They have fears about their families, guilt about their mistakes, worries about their futures. They have sick children and aging parents and financial problems and broken hearts." Marcus looked down at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. Even from this distance, he could see the expressions of love and concern on their faces. These people had come from all over the city, and probably from much farther away, just to pray for the Pope's health and recovery. "This is what I want you to remember when I am no longer here with you," Pope Francis said, turning to look directly at Marcus. "Your job was never just to protect my physical body from harm. Your real job, your most important job, was to help me stay connected to all of those hearts down there." The Pope placed his hand over Marcus's heart. "In here lives every person you have comforted over the years, every tear you have helped to dry, every moment of grace you have made possible without even knowing it. You have been my hands when my hands were too tired to reach out. You have been my eyes when my eyes could not see clearly. You have been my heart when my heart was too full to hold any more love." Marcus felt the weight and truth of these words settling into his soul. He had always thought of his job in terms of security and protection, but now he was beginning to understand that his real work had been about love and connection. "Do you remember Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman from China who visited us 2 years ago?" the Pope asked. Marcus nodded. Mrs. Chen had traveled thousands of miles to meet the Pope, and she spoke very little Italian or English. She was so nervous and frightened that she could barely speak when she met me. But you noticed her fear, and you spent several minutes before her audience teaching her how to pronounce a simple greeting in Italian. Marcus remembered Mrs. Chen well. She had been shaking with nervousness, and he had felt sorry for her. Teaching her a few basic words had seemed like such a small thing to do. Because of your kindness, Mrs. Chen was able to have a real conversation with me instead of just standing there in terrified silence. She told me later through a translator that your gentle help made her feel welcome and valued. She said it was one of the most beautiful moments of her entire life. The Pope smiled as he continued. And do you remember the young seminarian from Africa who fainted during the long ceremony last year? While everyone else was focused on the formal proceedings, you quietly brought him water and made sure he was okay. You did it so discreetly that most people did not even notice. Marcus did remember that day. The young man had looked pale and unsteady, and Marcus had been worried that he might collapse completely. That seminarian wrote to his bishop afterward and said that your quiet act of care reminded him why he wanted to become a priest in the first place. He said watching you serve others with such natural kindness inspired him to be a better servant of God himself. David has been your greatest teacher, Pope Francis said with deep conviction. Through loving him, you have learned to see the image of God in every person you encounter, no matter how different or difficult they might seem. This is why you have been such an extraordinary guard, and why you have touched so many lives over the years. Pope Francis slowly reached toward his bedside table, his movements careful but determined. Marcus watched as the Holy Father opened a small wooden box that had been sitting there. From inside the box, the Pope pulled out a white envelope that was sealed with red wax and marked with the official papal seal. This is for David, Pope Francis said, placing the envelope in Marcus's trembling hands. Inside is something I have been working on for several weeks, ever since I decided to have this conversation with you. Marcus held the envelope carefully, as if it were made of the most precious material in the world. His hands were shaking so much he was afraid he might drop it. Holy Father, what is this? Open it, the Pope said with a smile that made his whole face light up despite his physical weakness. Marcus carefully broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on official Vatican paper, written in the Pope's own careful handwriting. But there was also something else that made Marcus gasp with surprise. It was a photograph of himself and David together, taken during a video call on his phone. How do you have this picture? Marcus asked in amazement. Pope Francis chuckled softly. Last Christmas, during your lunch break, you were sitting in the small garden behind the chapel. You were having a video call with the care facility where David lives. I happened to be walking by when you were showing David my picture on your phone and telling him about the work we do here together. Marcus remembered that day perfectly. It was one of David's good days, when he seemed more alert and responsive than usual. Marcus had been so excited to share pictures of the Vatican with his son, even though he was never sure how much David really understood. You were so gentle and patient with him, the Pope continued. You showed him pictures of the Swiss Guard uniforms and told him about the beautiful art in the Vatican. You sang him a Christmas song and told him how much you loved him. You did not know that I was watching, but I was so moved by the tenderness in your voice that I asked my photographer to take a picture of you both on the phone screen. Marcus looked at the photograph again. It showed him smiling at his phone, and on the phone screen was David's face, looking directly at the camera with his simple, innocent expression. Somehow the photographer had captured a moment of pure love between father and son. But there is more, Pope Francis said, and his voice grew stronger with excitement. The letter I wrote to David is an invitation. I have arranged for him to visit us here at the Vatican next month. All of his travel expenses and medical care during the trip will be paid for by the Vatican. He will have a full tour of everything you have told him about, and his favorite Swiss Guard will be his personal guide for the entire visit. Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. For years, he had dreamed of being able to show David the place where he worked, but it had always seemed impossible. David's medical needs were too complex, and the cost would have been enormous. "Holy Father, I cannot accept such generosity," Marcus said through his tears. "This is too much. I do not deserve such kindness." Pope Francis raised his hand to stop Marcus from protesting further. "This is not about what you deserve, my friend. This is about love. Love is not something we earn or deserve. Love is something we give freely because we recognize the goodness in another person." The Pope struggled to sit up even straighter, and again Marcus automatically moved to help him get comfortable. "Besides," the Pope continued with a mischievous smile, "this visit is not just for David. It is for me too. Do you think I have not wondered about this young man who has shaped the heart of one of my most trusted guards? Do you think I do not want to meet the person who taught you how to love so completely and selflessly?" Marcus realized that the Pope was serious about wanting to meet David. This was not just an act of charity. It was a genuine desire to welcome David as an honored guest. David carries the image of God just as clearly as any cardinal or king who has ever walked through these halls, Pope Francis said with deep conviction. His disabilities do not make him less worthy of respect and honor. If anything, his innocence and purity make him more like the Jesus we follow, who said that we must become like little children to enter the kingdom of heaven. Pope Francis tried to sit up straighter in his bed, and Marcus immediately jumped up to help him. Without thinking, Marcus adjusted the pillows behind the Pope's back and made sure he was comfortable. This simple, automatic gesture made Pope Francis smile widely. "You see," the Pope said with joy in his voice, "even now, when we are having the most important conversation of your life, your first instinct is to take care of me. This is exactly what I am talking about, Marcus. This is why I asked for you specifically today." Marcus sat back down, feeling a little embarrassed, but also warmed by the Pope's obvious affection for him. He was beginning to understand that this conversation was about much more than he had first realized. "What I am about to tell you now," Pope Francis said, "has been on my heart for many months. I have been waiting for the right time to share it with you." The Pope looked directly into Marcus's eyes with an expression of deep love and understanding. "I know about your son, David." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat, and he felt his hands begin to shake. David was his most closely guarded secret, the part of his life he had never shared with anyone at work. How could the Pope possibly know about David? "I know that David is 22 years old and lives in a special care facility in Switzerland," the Pope continued gently. "I know that he was born with severe developmental disabilities and needs full-time medical care. I know that you have never spoken about him here at work because you wanted to protect his privacy and dignity." Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes again. David was his son, his only child, and the most important person in his life. But David would never be able to live independently, never be able to have a normal life. Marcus had spent years feeling guilty about this too, wondering if he had done something wrong, if he had failed as a father. "I know that every single penny of your salary goes directly to pay for David's care," Pope Francis said softly. "I know that you have not taken a vacation in 8 years because you cannot afford to lose even one day of income. I know that you eat simple meals and wear old clothes so that you can make sure David has everything he needs." Marcus was amazed and confused. How could the Pope know all of these details about his personal life? He had been so careful to keep his work and family life completely separate. "I also know that every morning before you begin your shift, you go to the small chapel in the Vatican and pray for David's health and happiness. You ask God to watch over him and to help the nurses and doctors who take care of him. You pray that David feels loved even when you cannot be with him." Now Marcus was crying openly. These prayers were the most private, sacred part of his daily routine. He had never told anyone about them. Pope Francis reached out and took Marcus's hand again. "My dear friend, David is not a burden or a failure. He is a gift from God. And your love for him has made you the exceptional guard and human being that you are today." Marcus shook his head, confused. "I do not understand, Holy Father. How has David made me a better guard? He cannot even recognize me most of the time because of his condition." "Ah, but that is where you are wrong," the Pope said with a gentle smile. "David has taught you the most important lesson any person can learn. He has taught you how to love someone completely without expecting anything in return. He has taught you that every human being has value and dignity, regardless of their abilities or disabilities." The Pope's voice became stronger and more passionate. "Because you understand what it means to love someone who cannot love you back in the traditional way, you are able to show genuine compassion to everyone you meet. When you see sick children or elderly people or homeless individuals, you do not see problems to be solved or burdens to be carried. You see human beings worthy of love and respect, just like David." Marcus began to understand what the Pope was saying. His experiences with David had indeed changed him in ways he had never fully realized. "The reason you held Father Miguel's hand in the ambulance was because you understand that everyone deserves to be treated with tenderness, especially in their most vulnerable moments. The reason you are patient with difficult visitors is because you know that behavior problems often come from pain or fear, not from bad intentions. The reason you notice when people are struggling is because you have spent years watching over someone who cannot ask for help himself." Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest. He had always seen his relationship with David as separate from his work, but now he was beginning to see how connected they really were. Pope Francis watched as Marcus wiped away his tears and sat up straighter in the chair. The Holy Father could see that something had changed in the guard's face. The heavy sadness that had been there for so long was beginning to lift away. But the Pope was not finished. He had much more to tell Marcus about the things he had observed over the years. "Now that we have talked about Father Miguel," the Pope said, "I want to tell you about something else. Something that will help you understand why I ask you to come here today." The Pope adjusted his position in the bed and looked at Marcus with eyes full of warmth and affection. "Do you remember the day you first applied to join the Swiss Guard 15 years ago?" Pope Francis asked. Marcus nodded, thinking back to when he was a young man full of dreams and hopes. "You wrote in your application letter that you wanted to serve God by protecting his representative on earth. Do you remember writing those words?" "Yes, Holy Father," Marcus replied. "I meant every word of it. I wanted to do something important with my life, something that would honor God and help other people." The Pope smiled. "You have done exactly that, Marcus, but you have done so much more than just protect my physical body. You have protected my spirit, my heart, and my ability to connect with people all around the world." Marcus looked confused. He had always thought his job was simple and clear. Stand guard, watch for danger, keep the Pope safe from harm. He had never thought about protecting anything beyond the Pope's physical safety. "Let me tell you about some of the things I have watched you do over the years," Pope Francis continued. "Things that you probably do not even remember because they seem so natural and normal to you." The Pope's eyes grew distant as he recalled memories from the past. "Do you remember little Maria, the girl with leukemia who visited us last year? She was only 8 years old, and she was so sick from her treatments that she could barely walk. But she had always dreamed of seeing the Vatican and meeting the Pope." Marcus did remember Maria. She was a tiny girl with no hair because of her cancer treatments, but she had the biggest, brightest smile he had ever seen. "Yes, I remember her," Marcus said softly. "During your lunch break that day, instead of eating or resting, you spent 30 minutes showing Maria the secret passages and hidden rooms in the Vatican. You told her stories about the history of the building and made her feel like she was discovering buried treasure. Do you remember what she said to her mother afterward?" Marcus shook his head. He had enjoyed spending time with Maria, but he had not thought it was anything special. She told her mother that meeting the Pope was wonderful, but spending time with the magical Swiss Guard, who knew all the secrets of the Vatican, was the best part of her whole trip. She said you made her feel like a princess exploring a fairy tale castle. Marcus felt surprised and touched. He had no idea that his simple kindness had meant so much to the little girl. "And do you remember the homeless man who tried to approach me after Easter Mass last year?" The Pope continued. "He was dirty and smelled bad, and he was clearly drunk or sick. Most guards would have pushed him away immediately." Marcus remembered that day well. The man had been stumbling and could barely stand up. "I remember," Marcus said. "Instead of pushing him away, you caught him when he started to fall. You helped him stand up straight and spoke to him gently. You asked him if he needed medical help. Then you quietly made sure he got food from the Vatican kitchen before he left. You treated him with the same respect you would show to any important visitor." The Pope's voice became stronger with emotion. "That man wrote me a letter 2 months later. He said that your kindness that day reminded him that he was still a human being worthy of love and respect. He said it gave him the strength to get help for his drinking problem and find a place to live. He is now sober and working at a shelter helping other homeless people." Marcus felt amazed. He had never heard about the letter or what happened to the homeless man afterward. He had simply tried to treat the man with basic human dignity. "And there are so many other moments," the Pope continued. "When my arthritis makes it difficult for me to walk, you slow down your pace without making it obvious. When children are frightened by the formal ceremonies, you make funny faces to make them smile. When elderly visitors are tired, you quietly bring them chairs. When people are crying, you offer them tissues." Marcus began to realize that the Pope had been watching him much more carefully than he had ever imagined. All of these small acts of kindness had seemed so natural and unimportant to him, but apparently they had been noticed and appreciated. Pope Francis watched Marcus cry and waited patiently for him to catch his breath. A Holy Father's eyes were full of understanding and love. He had seen many people carry heavy burdens of guilt and shame, and he knew that healing took time and gentle words. "My son," the Pope said when Marcus's tears began to slow down, "I need to tell you about something that happened to me last night. Something very special and important." The Pope's voice became stronger, as if talking about this gave him energy despite his physical weakness. "Father Miguel came to me in a dream," Pope Francis continued. "It was so real that when I woke up, I looked around the room expecting to see him standing there. He looked exactly as he did when he was alive, young and full of joy. But there was something different about him. He seemed to glow with a beautiful light, and his face was completely peaceful." Marcus stopped crying and looked at the Pope with wide eyes. He had dreamed about Father Miguel many times over the past 3 years, but those dreams were always filled with sadness and the terrible memories of the accident. "Do you know what Father Miguel told me in this dream?" the Pope asked. Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. "He told me to find you and give you a message. He wanted me to thank you for everything you did for him during his final moments on earth." The Pope reached over and took Marcus's hand in both of his own hands. "Father Miguel wanted you to know that when he was dying in that ambulance, scared and in pain, your presence beside him was like having an angel from heaven right there with him. He said that your hand holding his hand gave him strength and comfort." Marcus felt his heart beating fast. Could this really be true? Had Father Miguel really appeared to the Pope in a dream? "He also wanted to thank you for the way you treated his mother," the Pope continued. "He said that watching from heaven as you spent hours with her, telling her stories about his work and his faith, made him cry tears of joy. He said you helped his mother understand that his death had meaning and purpose in God's plan." Pope Francis squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. "But most importantly, Father Miguel wanted you to know that you were not his guard that day in the ambulance. You were his brother. You were his friend. You were exactly what God wanted you to be in that moment." Marcus felt something incredible happening inside his chest. It was as if a huge, heavy rock that he had been carrying for 3 years was suddenly becoming lighter and lighter. The guilt and shame that had been eating away at his heart began to dissolve like ice melting in warm sunshine. "But Holy Father," Marcus whispered, "I was supposed to protect everyone. That was my job. How can I forgive myself for failing?" Pope Francis smiled, and for a moment he looked less sick and more like the strong, wise leader Marcus had always known. My dear Marcus, you did protect everyone. You protected Father Miguel's dignity in his final moments. You protected his mother's heart by making sure she knew exactly how much her son was loved and respected. You protected his memory by honoring it with your visits to his grave. The Pope paused and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. Sometimes protection is not about preventing bad things from happening. Sometimes protection is about making sure that when bad things do happen, they are handled with love, respect, and dignity. That is exactly what you did. Marcus began to understand something he had never thought about before. All these years he had been thinking that his failure was in not preventing the accident. But maybe his real success was in how he responded after the accident happened. Father Miguel also told me something else. The Pope said with a gentle smile. He said that every time you visit his grave and say prayers for his soul, he feels the love and remembers the kindness you showed him. He wanted you to know that your guilt has been hurting not just you, but also him, because he never wanted you to suffer for something that was not your fault. Tears began flowing down Marcus's face again, but these tears felt different. They were not tears of pain and guilt. They were tears of relief and healing. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt like maybe he could forgive himself. Can you do something for me? The Pope asked softly. Can you let go of this burden you have been carrying? Can you accept that you did everything right when everything went wrong? Can you believe that Father Miguel is grateful for your kindness rather than angry about your imagined failure? Marcus nodded his head, feeling lighter than he had felt in years. Yes, Holy Father, he whispered. I think I can. Pope Francis looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The Holy Father moved his hand slowly and placed it on Marcus's shoulder. Even though the Pope was weak and lying in bed, his touch felt strong and comforting. Marcus had spent years being the strong one, the protector, but now he felt like a small child being comforted by a loving father. You think I do not notice the little things, Pope Francis began, but I see everything. I see how you stand a little straighter when children come to visit the Vatican. I see how your eyes get watery when we visit the hospitals and meet sick people. I see how you write letters to your mother every single week, telling her about the work we do here. Marcus felt shocked. He had always believed that his job was to be invisible, to watch without being watched. He thought he had done a good job of keeping his personal feelings hidden while he worked. Nobody had ever told him that the Pope was paying attention to these small details about his life. Holy Father, Marcus started to speak, but the Pope raised his hand gently to stop him. There is something else I see, Pope Francis continued, and his voice became even softer. For 3 years now, you have been carrying a heavy weight in your heart, a weight that was never yours to carry. When that young priest died in the car accident during our trip to Brazil, you blamed yourself for what happened. Marcus felt like someone had hit him in the chest. His breathing became difficult, and his hands began to shake. He had never talked to anyone about what happened in Brazil 3 years ago. He had buried those feelings deep inside his heart and tried to forget about them. How could the Pope know about this? The Pope's voice was gentle but serious. You believe that if you had been more careful, if you had insisted on different security arrangements for our travel, Father Miguel would still be alive today. You have carried this guilt every single day since it happened. Tears began to flow down Marcus's face. For 3 years, he had tortured himself with thoughts about that terrible day. Father Miguel was a young priest who had been traveling with the Pope's group during a visit to Brazil. He was only 28 years old, full of energy and love for God. The car accident happened so fast that nobody could have prevented it, but Marcus had always felt responsible. Every night when you go to sleep, the Pope continued, you think about what you could have done differently. You wonder if you failed in your duty to protect everyone in our group. You question whether you deserve to continue serving as a Swiss guard. Marcus could no longer hold back his emotions. The tears flowed freely as years of hidden pain and guilt poured out of him. He had spent so much energy trying to appear strong and professional, but inside he had been breaking apart little by little. "My son," Pope Francis said with deep compassion, "you have been punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. That accident was a tragedy, but it was not caused by anything you did or did not do. The roads were slippery from rain. The other driver lost control of his vehicle. There was nothing anyone could have done to prevent it." But Marcus shook his head. "I should have protected him," he whispered through his tears. "It was my job to make sure everyone was safe. I failed him. I failed you. I failed God." Pope Francis struggled to sit up straighter in his bed. Despite his physical weakness, his voice became stronger and more determined. "Listen to me very carefully, Marcus. You did not fail anyone. What you did in those terrible moments after the accident showed the true heart of a servant of God." The Pope paused, letting his words sink in. Then he continued with a voice full of love and certainty. "You held Father Miguel's hand in the ambulance as he was dying. You prayed with him. You made sure he was not alone in his final moments. You stayed with his body at the hospital until his mother could arrive from her village. You personally delivered his belongings to her and spent hours telling her stories about her son's work and faith." Marcus looked up at the Pope through his tears. He had done all of those things, but he had never thought of them as anything special. They just seemed like the right things to do during such a horrible time. "You have visited Father Miguel's grave every single time we have returned to Brazil," the Pope continued. "You bring flowers and say prayers for his soul. His mother told me in a letter that your kindness helped her survive the worst time of her life. She said you were like an angel sent by God to help her family." Marcus felt something beginning to change inside his heart. For 3 years, he had only thought about what he failed to do. He had never considered that maybe he had done something right, something important and meaningful. When Marcus stepped into the papal bedroom, he felt like the air had changed. The room was different from how he had ever seen it before. Heavy curtains blocked most of the sunlight, making everything look soft and golden. The smell of medicine mixed with the scent of burning candles. It was quiet except for the sound of someone breathing slowly and carefully. Pope Francis was lying in his bed, propped up against several white pillows. Marcus had always seen the Pope standing, walking, or sitting in his chair during meetings, but now the Holy Father looked smaller and more fragile than Marcus had ever imagined. The Pope's face was pale, but his eyes were still bright and full of warmth. When he saw Marcus enter the room, Pope Francis smiled that same gentle smile that had made Marcus feel welcome from his very first day of service. "Marcus," the Pope said in a voice that was weaker than usual but still filled with kindness, "please, come closer. I have been waiting for you." Marcus felt his hand shake slightly as he removed his helmet and held it under his arm. He had stood guard outside this room thousands of times, but he had never been invited inside when the Pope was resting. There were other people in the room. Marcus recognized the Pope's personal secretary, Father Giovanni, who was standing near the window. Cardinal Martinez was there too, along with 2 other Vatican officials. But when Pope Francis saw Marcus approaching the bed, he made a small gesture with his hand. Everyone else understood immediately and moved toward the door. "What I need to tell you," the Pope whispered to Marcus, "is meant for your ears first." Marcus felt his heart beating so hard he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. He walked slowly toward the bed, wondering what could be so important that the leader of more than 1 billion Catholics around the world would want to speak to him privately. As the other people left the room, Marcus found himself alone with Pope Francis for the first time in 15 years. The Pope looked at him with those kind eyes and patted the chair beside his bed. "Sit down, my friend," he said. "We have much to talk about." Marcus sat down carefully, still holding his helmet. He had been trained to stand at attention, to be ready to act at any moment. Sitting down felt strange and informal, but the Pope's gentle manner made him feel more comfortable. This was not a formal meeting or ceremony. This felt like something much more personal and important. "You look worried," Pope Francis said with a small laugh. "Do not be afraid, Marcus. I asked you here because there are things I need to say to you. Things I have been thinking about for a very long time." The Pope reached out slowly and placed his hand on Marcus's arm. "You think you know why you are here, but you do not. You think this is about my health, but it is about something much more important." Marcus looked into the Pope's eyes and saw something he had never noticed before. It was not just kindness or gentleness. It was understanding. It was as if the Pope could see inside Marcus's heart and mind. It was as if Pope Francis knew things about Marcus that Marcus had never told anyone. "For 15 years, you have stood outside my door," the Pope continued. "You have protected me during travels around the world. You have watched over me during public ceremonies and private prayers. But did you know that all this time, I have been watching you too?" Marcus felt surprised and confused. He had always tried to be invisible, to do his job without drawing attention to himself. Guards were supposed to blend into the background, to be present but not noticed. How could the Pope have been watching him? Pope Francis smiled again, and Marcus could see that despite his physical weakness, the Holy Father's spirit was still strong. "Oh yes, my dear Marcus," the Pope said softly. "I see everything. And what I have seen in you over these years has filled my heart with joy and gratitude. That is why you are here today." Marcus realized that this conversation was going to be unlike anything he had ever expected. Something very important was about to happen, and his life was about to change forever. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Vatican City when Captain Marcus Weber started his daily routine. He had been doing the same job for 15 long years, and every morning felt exactly the same. Marcus put on his colorful Swiss Guard uniform. The red, blue, and yellow stripes bright against the early morning light. The uniform was heavy and warm, but he wore it with pride. It meant he was one of the chosen few who protected the most important man in the Catholic world. Marcus walked through the quiet hallways of the Vatican. His boots made soft sounds on the old marble floors. The walls around him were covered with paintings and decorations that were hundreds of years old. Some days he still could not believe he worked in such a special place. When he was a young man growing up in Switzerland, he never imagined he would spend his life walking these sacred halls. As he made his morning rounds, Marcus checked every door and every window. This was his job. He had to make sure everything was safe and secure before the Pope woke up. The papal apartments were on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace. Marcus knew every corner, every hidden passage, and every possible way someone could try to get inside. He had memorized it all during his first year of service. The Vatican was slowly waking up. Marcus could hear the sounds of other guards beginning their shifts. He could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen downstairs. Soon, the Pope would wake up and begin another day of meetings, prayers, and ceremonies. Marcus would be there, watching silently, making sure nothing bad happened. Marcus was checking the security of a window when his radio suddenly came to life. The voice was urgent and serious. "Captain Weber, report to the papal chambers immediately. His Holiness has requested your presence." Marcus stopped moving. In all his 15 years of protecting Pope Francis, the Holy Father had never asked for him by name. The Pope was always kind to the guards. He would smile and say good morning when he saw them. Sometimes he would stop and ask about their families or joke about the weather. But he had never specifically requested to see Marcus alone. This was very unusual. Marcus felt his heart start beating faster. Something was wrong. He could hear it in the voice on the radio. He could feel it in the air around him. As he hurried toward the papal apartments, he noticed other people moving quickly through the hallways. There were doctors carrying medical bags. There were Vatican officials talking in quiet, worried voices. When Marcus reached the corridor outside the Pope's bedroom, he saw even more signs that something serious was happening. Cardinal Martinez, the Pope's closest advisor, was standing outside the door looking very concerned. 2 doctors were talking quietly in a corner. A nurse was carrying supplies into the room. Marcus had been trained for many different situations. He knew what to do if there was an attack. He knew how to evacuate the Pope if there was danger. He knew how to handle crowds and protesters, but he had never been prepared for this kind of situation. Nobody had ever told him what to do if the Pope was sick or dying. As Marcus stood outside the bedroom door, he thought about all the years he had spent protecting Pope Francis. The Pope was not just his job. Over the years, Marcus had grown to truly care about this gentle, humble man who led the Catholic Church. Pope Francis was different from other important people Marcus had met. He was kind and real. He cared about poor people and sick children. He made everyone around him feel important and loved. The door to the papal bedroom opened, and Cardinal Martinez gestured for Marcus to come inside. "He is asking for you specifically," the cardinal whispered. "He has been waiting for you to arrive." Marcus took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. He had no idea what was waiting for him inside that room. He had no idea that this moment would change everything he thought he knew about his job, about the Pope, and about himself. All he knew was that the man he had sworn to protect was calling for him, and he would answer that call no matter what it meant. As Marcus walked through the doorway into the papal bedroom, he felt like he was stepping into a completely different world. Nothing would ever be the same again.